welcome to our webinar, Grad School for Undocumented Students. I'm your host tonight, Reina Barrera Aguilar, and I'm a current fellow at 10,000 Degrees. I oversee students at Sonoma State Universities and Sacramento State Universities. And I'm also an alumna of the program, and I graduated from San Francisco State. I also want to welcome my lovely co-host, Han, who is going to be helping me out with some of the behind the scenes stuff and any tech issues. So if you seem to be having any tech issues, you can reach out to her, just send her a message in the chat. And our lovely career success manager, Gwen Snyder, unfortunately was not able to be here tonight, but please feel free to follow up with her through email for any career advising needs that you may have. And I also want to remind everyone watching tonight to please send us their questions through the Q&A. It's a lot easier to answer them if you do them through the Q&A rather than the chat. So try to send them through there, and we'll do our very best to answer all of them as we go. We also encourage you to take notes and to follow up with each of our panelists if all your questions don't get answered. Network with them. They would all love to hear from you, and we'll provide their contact information at the end of this webinar. And just as a reminder, we are recording the webinar, so the recording will be available afterwards. So panelists, we're going to have each of them introduce themselves. We're going to start off with their names, their current workplace or work situation, college attended, and then we're going to have them answer the question, why grad school? So we'll start off with Angel. Take it away, Angel.
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, I guess the slide kind of covers everything, but I went to SF State for undergrad, studied biology there, and then I went to UCSF for a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences. And then currently I'm a scientist at Varian Medical Systems. We're working on trying to find new drugs for lung cancer and pancreatic cancers. As far as why grad school, so at least in my field, you know, you can get a job position in a lab right out of undergrad, but if you eventually want to go into a leadership position where you're kind of running a lab or directing an area of research, a PhD is pretty much required for that. So that's kind of what my long-term goal is, and that's ultimately why I decided to go to graduate school.
Oh, hi, everyone. I went to Sonoma State University for undergrad. I studied political science and fine arts with an emphasis in oil painting. Then I worked at 10,000 Degrees for about 4 or 5 years. And in 2017, I went to Harvard Graduate School of Education for my master's in education policy and management. For me, well, actually, I currently work at San Jose State University at the Office of the President as the Budget and Personnel Specialist. It feels sometimes that everything that I've done and studied doesn't really have a straight line, but I think everything together makes sense. And so I really enjoy the position that I have and the work that I do there. Why college for me is, or why grad school? I think I decided to apply a year earlier because I was planning to apply in 2008 to go to graduate school. But the elections happened when Trump got elected. And I always feel like education is a very safe space for me and a place where I could kind of pause my immigration status and focus on achieving the next goal that could probably get me to either achieve more knowledge or a higher paying job. So that's why I went back to grad school. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adriana Quintana Lopez, and this is my 2-month-old daughter, Selena Valentina. I went to Santa Rosa Junior College and got my associate's degree in psychology, transferred to UC Davis, where I got my bachelor's in Chicanx studies with a minor in education. I used to be a fellow at 10,000 Degrees, and then I decided to go back to school. So I'm a PhD student at UC Davis again. I loved it so much that I decided to go back. And my current emphasis is school organization and educational policy. And while in grad school, I am a teaching assistant in the School of Education. So I help the professors, grading papers and things like that. That is what I do while I'm in grad school, apart from being a student. And why grad school for me? I decided to go back to grad school after it was announced that Daca had been rescinded, because it was, for me, the last option that I had to be able to be in a space where I felt safe, especially at UC Davis with the AB 540 and the Undocumented Student Center and the community that I had built there. And I've always wanted to get my PhD, especially in education, and wanting to do more research in equitable educational policies. So really, that's why I decided to go back to grad school.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So now that we have kind of a brief, background on each of our panelists, I really encourage everyone to keep on sending those questions through the Q&A. I have a set list of questions that I can ask them, but we'd also love to hear directly from you and get all your questions answered. So we do have one so far from Catherine, and it says, I'm thinking of applying to out-of-state universities. Would you recommend only applying to programs in California for support as an undocumented student? So whoever wants to jump in and answer that.
I could try to answer that question. I think even as a undergraduate student, it's good to apply to California schools. If you're thinking of applying somewhere outside of California, you need to take into consideration the school policies for, undergrad or graduate students. You also have to take into account the state policies. So in some states, you might have less rights than in other states, like here in California. You might not be able to drive. Also to keep in mind is like, how are you going to travel back and forth between the states? Or are you planning to stay there, for the entirety of your graduate program? Also, financial aid might be very different outside of California. Maybe some universities have it restricted, maybe some don't. So if you're planning to look outside California, I would really encourage you to start researching the schools and the programs and the states that you might be applying to. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's kind of going into this theme, that I wanted to talk about was more just the application process as a whole. And Ingrid had a question, how did you decide on a program and what made it the one? So, how did you decide, and is there anything students should be looking for when choosing a program?
I can chime in for a bit. So when I was going through the process, I think I applied to like 10 schools. Most of them were UCs, and then a couple were out of state in the East Coast. I mean, I had worked at UCSF prior, and that kind of made it my dream school to begin with. But I think when I was going through the process, part of the interview process is actually you coming on campus and interviewing with the students and the professors. And I think throughout that process, I quickly realized that every school and every program had its own kind of culture. And whereas, the East Coast just seemed very formal to me, the West Coast kind of seemed a bit more laid back, and the students there seemed a bit happier. So ultimately, I got my admissions at UCSF, and I kind of knew that's where I wanted to go. So that kind of made it easy. But I think throughout the process, it helped kind of getting to know the other students and getting to be able to talk to the other professors as well.
I would add that kind of emphasizing Angel's point, you should also be looking at the professors you want to be working with, because depending on what professors are in what universities, the likelihood of you getting accepted into a program is higher or lower. But usually what happens in grad school is that you get to work closely with specific professors. So I think if you like the professor and you like the work that they do and you see yourself in kind of following or branching off from their footsteps, this is probably a sign that you would like the program. Also, Angel and I were joking earlier that you need to like, for example, if you're going to the East Coast, you should like the snow and the weather, or at least be aware of it.
Yeah, I was telling Alma I got stuck in a blizzard when I interviewed. That was crazy.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in, Adriana?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Kind of chiming off of what Angel and Alma were saying is, I think it is really important that you look into the culture of the university that you're applying to. I applied to 8 different universities, ultimately got into 2, UC Davis being one of them. I did get into a master's at University of Pennsylvania, but it ultimately came down to who was going to fund my my time at graduate school. UPenn only gave me $10,000 the first year, and then I had to figure out how to pay for the rest of my time there. And it was just a master's. So I ultimately decided to go back to UC Davis because I could get TA-ships or be a graduate student researcher on campus and get my tuition paid for and get an additional stipend. So it really depended on if I was going to be able to find funding on campus. And because UC Davis is within California, I am considered a California resident, AB 540 and things like that. So it really came down to the funding and also the professor that I wanted to work with. Ultimately, her telling me that even though our research interest didn't align, she was willing to work with me because she did want me to advance my own research, and instead of her trying to advance her own research agenda. So really trying to find community also on campus was a big aspect for me. So those are things that I would look into when applying to grad school.
I also agree with Adriana. I got into 3 schools, and funny enough, Harvard was the one that funded me better. So it was, my decision was pretty much set when I heard back from them. And I did know that that was going to be the cheapest one, the most affordable option for me.
Yeah, and we'll definitely go a little more in depth with funding a little later. There's 2 more questions here. One is, do you recommend getting work experience before applying?
I could go. For me, it was very, very helpful to have work experience because I did try to apply to graduate school right out of college. And I think what I noticed was that I didn't get into universities for their PhDs or master programs because I didn't have enough experience. And so I think, again, when you're thinking of what you want to study, and you're thinking of maybe taking time off and working on the field, it really also depends on what you have decided to do. So in education, it makes sense sometimes to get more experience, but at the same time, if you were maybe in programs to get into graduate school and you already did tons of internships related to what you want to study, it might also make sense to go straight out of undergrad.
Yeah, and Angel, I know that you said that your work experience was really key in you choosing what school and program you wanted to do, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think I worked for about a year at a lab at UCSF, but I think I can't emphasize enough that that is really the important part. I mean, I've got in. I feel like in retrospect, though, if I would have worked maybe for another year or 2, I think I would have been a bit more prepared, because when I joined UCSF, there was all these other students who come from like really prestigious labs and have like a paper or 2 under their belt. So I came in feeling like, oh my God, I barely have any experience. But I think if you can work in a lab or with a professor as an undergrad, and work on a research project, I think that can really help you get your foot in the door and get a couple of letters. So I think if I were to go back and do it again, I would have been a bit more hands-on with getting more experience in research projects.
Great, yeah. And kind of as a follow-up to that, somebody asked, what does work experience look like? Internships, maybe volunteering. What did those things look like for you all?
I think you can definitely use, it doesn't have to actually be like a paying job that gives you the experience. It could be an internship if you're applying to education, like if you did an internship in a school, if you did research with a professor in undergrad, volunteer work, anything that is going to give you transferable skills that you're able to use while in grad school, I think you can definitely use those to your advantage, especially when writing your, your statement of purpose. How did those opportunities give you the skills and the capabilities to add to your graduate program that you're applying to? How did it prepare you, and how did it motivate you to actually apply to these programs and wanting to go to grad school? Like, I think you can definitely use those. It doesn't necessarily have to be an actual job. You can definitely use volunteer work. And I know that I used a lot of those in my resume when submitting it to graduate school.
Yep, absolutely, Adriana. Alma, do you want to jump in?
I was just gonna say, for me, it really actually was, it took the form of a job. And I think what was important for me was that that job became a bridge between what I studied in college, because like I said, it was political science, and what I wanted to study in grad school, which was education. So looking back, again, this was very helpful to have. And for me, it turned out that it just was a job that paid me.
Great. So next question we have is, with the pandemic happening and classes being virtual, would you recommend still applying to grad school or wait to be in person to make the transition easier? What would you recommend?
I don't really see why having virtual classes would stop you from applying. I think it could stop you from deciding to attend. But if you could get the application process and done once and then become familiar with it, it'll really help you understand it if you have to do it again because maybe you didn't get accepted or because maybe you want to postpone a year. In terms of attending, I guess it would have its advantages and disadvantages because you have to know yourself and know whether you'll be successful in a online environment. But I guess the plus side is when we're talking about funding and being able to pay for all of this, maybe you wouldn't have to worry about additional costs of living or moving, things like that.
I wouldn't say the transition in person would be easier than online. I mean, even though I had been an undergrad at UC Davis, transitioning to graduate school only after being out of school for a year was actually a really, really hard transition for me. Because grad school is a whole different thing. It's completely different. It's completely different than undergrad. And I found it that it's definitely more isolating because once you start going into your specific research focus, you definitely are spending more alone time. So I feel like online learning or the distance learning can kind of be the same way, but having Zoom and being able to connect with other peers, it can definitely have its benefits, but I mean, it really depends on the person you are and if you like online classes or not. I had never taken an online class before as an undergrad, so when we had to do Zoom, everything. It was like completely new for me. But I think what Alma had mentioned before, you have to look at the type of person you are, and you can learn and really, use it to your advantage.
Kind of going off what Adriana said earlier, I think one of the most important things about grad school is building your community and finding people that you connect with. But either way, whether virtual or in person, you will have to make an effort to create and find that community. When I was at Harvard, I think one of the best things was finding the Latinx community and just like being able to connect with them. It really helped me through like, the seasons. But again, either way, you have to make an effort and like, find that community.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in briefly. I have a couple friends that just started their PhD programs this fall, and I don't know. I think if you're gonna go into a lab, it's gonna be tricky coming back during the pandemic. I know a lot of labs are only half or a quarter staff, so if you're trying to make progress in your research project, that's going to be a big challenge. And even for the lab I'm running right now, like ordering stuff is taking forever. So keep that in mind, as you're looking for apartments and all that. I would say for a PhD program, you're committing 6 to 8 years of your life. And if you want to make that decision based on a conference call, if you're that kind of person, go for it. But I wouldn't do that. I would definitely like to meet people in person. But I think for master's programs, actually, my mom's going back to school right now for some of her credits. And I told her, jump on it, Mom. Like, it's all virtual. You don't have to go to College of Marin to do any of that. So I think, figure out which program you're applying to. And if it's a short and sweet one, just jump on it, get it done now.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm also taking some College of Marin classes on the side, just because it is online, don't have to actually go to campus. Take advantage of that while you can, but it definitely comes with its own challenges, for sure. Great. So another question is, do you think it's possible to keep the job you have now and go to school at the same time? Or did you have to give up certain things in order to make things work? If so, what things did you have to give up for grad school?
For STEM, I think you're not supposed to work. You're actually on a contract that says you're a researcher and all that. So for a PhD, in that regard, you can't have another job. People do it. Some people DJ. Some people do club stuff overnight. But I think in terms of giving stuff up, I felt like I did. I mean, I think what Adriana mentioned in the beginning, my first year was hard. Like I felt like my two worlds were splitting apart, like all the people I knew from undergrad and all these new people, and my identity as an undocumented person, and then coming into a world where everybody is super well educated and privileged. Like I just felt like I was just being destroyed. That kind of made me kind of pull back a lot, become very isolated. But I think through that process, I was able to come out on the other side a bit more, I think, ready for grad school. So I had to give up, seeing a lot of my friends, even my family sometimes, because I was really struggling my first year. Like I was barely keeping up with the material. But over time, it got easier. I think I started coming back in and I started getting more involved, picked up new hobbies. But yeah, I think the first year is definitely very tough for I think a lot of students.
I think you can, well, I wanted to keep my job, but Scott didn't let me because I was going to go to UC Davis. And ultimately, I didn't actually move to Davis, so I was commuting to school 5 days a week, all the way from Point Reyes, so it was quite a commute. But I had cohort mates who actually did keep their full-time jobs, and I saw how stressed they were. Being our first year of grad school and having a full-time job where they actually had to meet deadlines on top of deadlines, and then sometimes not even going to class because they had to do work commitments. So it could get really daunting. And I know that her mates actually decided to quit her job because she just couldn't handle it anymore. And it was way too much on top of all the readings you have to do, the papers you have to write. So I would definitely look into it and see if you're willing to, or even able to, balance your full-time job and grad school. I only worked 20 hours a week my first year, and I was still having a really hard time. So it was definitely tough, trying to meet all those deadlines while also working, even though my job was on campus. So it's something that you have to look into, and see if you can not work for your first year. I know for a few friends who are in law school, you're not supposed to work while you're in law school, because it's just so much work that you actually have to do. But yeah, definitely it can. I know that some people do it, and kudos to them, but I know that Scott was right. I couldn't have done it.
So for me, I was in a master's program, and some master's program are built so that you can continue working because they'll have a lot of the classes on the evening. Still though, kind of like resonating with Angel and Adriana, I wouldn't have chosen to work that year when I was in the master's program because I think I missed out in a lot of good opportunities to like network at the school, or like take certain classes. And I had to kind of limit myself because as we'll probably talk about this later, but funding it's limited for master programs. So then I had to figure out that how to pay for it. And part of the way that I was able to fund it was that I was working part-time. But yeah, if I could choose not to, I would have loved to not work even the 15 hours a week that I was doing, just because it made the experience a lot harder. And it was much more difficult. And I feel like I would have taken better, more things out of the experience if I wasn't so pressed with time and pressed with like worries from the job. Yeah.
Great. So there's some questions coming up about support systems during grad school. And another one says, when applying, were you comfortable mentioning to schools your undocumented or your documentation status? Is it safe to disclose that? So if you can speak a little bit to that, and then kind of a little bit more on how you built a safe community around you.
Because of FERPA, schools shouldn't be able to disclose whatever information they get from you. So I guess in that sense, it's safe. I was pretty comfortable sharing my status because first of all, like I've been talking about it for many years. I talked about it, I think right after college is when I started, inspired by Angel. But I think I can't talk about my story without talking about my documentation status. And I know it's different for everyone, but in my case, if I pull out the struggles in my life that have been caused because of the status and the struggles that I've overcome, then my essay doesn't really look like anything. It's like, oh, I've had no experience at all, because it's such a big part of who I am. So in my essay, I mentioned it and I talked about my experience because it was so central to how I got to be where I am. So, but again, that I don't know, maybe Angela and Adriana had a different experience.
Yeah, I can jump off of what Alma said. Yeah, I think Alma and I were in the E4FC now, Immigrants Rising outreach team. And so we got used to like always giving these conversations around status and education. And I think I kind of took the same approach with schools. I would call them, I would always try to find either their program administrator or their program director and just ask them, hey, what's your funding situation look like for undocumented students? And if they said, I don't know, or we don't fund them, I just cross them off the list. Because I mean, you're spending your own money on the application, you're paying for the GRE, like in my opinion, you shouldn't waste your time on a school that's not going to help you, right? And so I quickly just found all the schools that at least gave me some kind of, a green light. And then those were the schools I applied to. I know that can be tough, that can be challenging, but after explaining it for the 100th time, you're just like, man, just let me live my life, right? So you quickly learn to just pick up and move on.
Just to add a little bit to Angel, I think it's definitely like, it gives you a sense of the school, because if you call a university and they tell you, oh no, we don't accept undocumented students, or their response is like, we don't like undocumented students, it's like, why would I attend that school if that's the environment that I'm getting myself into? So, or why would, if I disclose my status and they don't accept me because of the status, well, great, because then you prevented me from going through all of those maybe negative experiences. But that's also something that I kept in mind when applying.
Same to all of that.
Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your honesty, and sharing your answers with us. Another question from Samuel is, do you recommend, let's say, for certain fields to do dual programs or take the longer route? I'm referring to teaching and counseling for schools. So try to get in dual upper grad programs or just credential program and then masters.
If you want to go to a school where there's a dual program and they're willing to fund you, I would say definitely go for it. There's never a drawback in actually applying to a dual program. I have a friend who's currently trying to apply to a dual JD and PhD. So definitely go for it if they're willing to fund you, and you find a school where you feel you can find community and it's the right fit for you and the program that you want to go into, I would say yes, definitely.
Okay, great. And then Ingrid asks, how valuable is research experience when applying for grad school?
I'm gonna quickly say, because I know Adriana and he'll probably have more feedback on this, but it's probably a lot more relevant to a PhD than a master's, because then some masters will look at different types of experience, not necessarily research. I did have some research under my belt, but I think it's so that I could also apply for PhDs if I wanted to. So.
Yeah, for me, I actually mentioned to my major advisor at Davis that I wanted to go into a PhD, and then she strongly recommended that I do get research experience. So I did end up doing an honors thesis through the School of Education because I wanted to get a taste of what it was to do the type of research that I wanted to look into. Not just for the sake of taking a class and writing a research paper, but something that I was actually passionate about. And eventually that actually led me into what is now going to be my dissertation proposal. So for me, it was actually a starting point to move on to one, apply to grad school so I could use my honors thesis as a writing sample, and then actually use it for my literature review and going on to try to advance to candidacy. So you can definitely use whatever research experience you have, even if that is writing a paper in class. You still have to do research. You still have to, find research articles, read them. So definitely using all of those things that you've done before to your advantage. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll say is, I was on the admissions committee once or twice for my program, and I think what we're always looking for is somebody who knows how to ask a research question and how to think like a scientist, if you want to call it that. There's always the person who worked in a lab and did what they were told, and then there's the person who actually thought about their processes and was critical about it. So I think whatever experience you can get that's going to help you think critically about the project you're working on, that's what you should go towards, because there's labs that simply just put you to work and they don't really explain anything to you. But I think that's ultimately the goal of the research experience, right? It's to help you think critically, because if you can do that, at least at the undergrad level, you'll have a better chance of succeeding in graduate school.
And even for admissions, as Angel was talking about, I know that a lot of professors are actually the ones who are in grad admissions committees, and they're looking for someone who already knows what they're going to research or wanting to research, who they want to work with, because they want someone who's driven and already has that research question in mind so that they can get started from the get-go. And it can be hard, but I know that working with professors and just hearing them talk about the type of qualities and qualifications that they look for in prospective students, one of them being what is the research that you want to do, and are you willing to start it once you're here, not try to and figure it out while you're in the PhD process.
Great. And I know we've touched on this a little bit earlier, but everybody wants to know funding, loans, financial aid. Are there loans for undocumented students, scholarships? You know, how did you fund yourselves? Fellowships? So if you all can speak a little bit to that.
I guess I'll start it. I know that if you do have a work permit through Daca, I was able to get a TA-ship, so being a teaching assistant or a graduate student researcher on campus, but it's also the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship and the Ford Foundation Fellowships that undocumented students can apply for, and those can either fund your dissertation if you're in a PhD, or like your pre-dissertation, so funding you before you actually advance to candidacy. And then within UC Davis, there are internal scholarships and fellowships that you can apply to, and through the School of Education. So definitely there are avenues and routes that you can fund your program, even if you don't have a work permit. So I would definitely contact Graduate Studies, the department that you're planning to apply to, and ask them if there are scholarships available or fellowships available that you can apply to for students who don't have a work permit, if you don't have one, or documentation status. And again, as Angel mentioned before, if they're like, we don't know, or, you know, we don't fund undocumented students, then I wouldn't pay any mind to those universities, because they're just not going to be a friendly environment for you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when I was trying to decide, the way PhD programs are funded, at least, it's like Adriana says, you either get paid to teach or you get paid to do research, or a combination of both. In addition to that, there's all these fellowships. And it's something you should really pay attention to, because I remember when I was at Berkeley, it seemed like a lot of the funding, at least a portion of it, is based on TAing like multiple quarters, whereas at UCSF, it's all based on a research position. So you actually don't ever really have to teach other than the one quarter you're required to. So in that regard, like, your priority is your research, right? So you want to find funding mechanisms that are going to keep you working on your project or in the lab. So if you can find fellowships that will pay you to continue to do your research, or buy supplies for your project, like those are the types of things you should be looking for. I think Adriana mentioned a bunch that are really key. The other one I would also mention, especially for students who are currently in a UC or CSU, is the New Leaders Scholarship. So they provide you a stipend. If you go to a CSU or a UC undergrad and you go to a public UC or CSU graduate program, you qualify for an additional stipend at that level. And the great thing about that is money you can spend on whatever you want, like rent, food, whatever. So that's something you guys should be looking into. But yeah, I think talk to the programs and really get a breakdown on how your funding package is going to work, you know, throughout the entire program, not your first 2 years, but like, how's it going to look throughout your 6 or 8 years in the program?
So for master programs, there's actually not a lot of funding compared to the PhD programs. And so I think it's more about being creative in the way that we find money to pay for masters. Also, one of the reasons why I think I often encourage people to see if they're interested in the PhD programs, because it would open a lot more opportunities than finding funding for masters. But the way that I paid for my master was a serious combination. So I did a lot of fundraising. I did fundraising on GoFundMe. I did an event where I invited a bunch of people in my community and family and friends, and we did a fundraising. And I think those two together, I got about like, I want to say, I can't remember, but like 6,000, 5,000, no, like 8,000 maybe. And then I applied to tons of scholarships, and it really helps if you prepare ahead of time. I think I started preparing like a year before. I kind of already knew that I wanted to go to grad school either 2017 or 2018. And so I never missed a deadline on the scholarship. A lot of them were for undergrads, but kind of left it open on whether they would fund graduate students or they would fund undocumented students, and I applied anyway. I also spoke, like Angel, I spoke directly with each of these universities, their financial aid office, and the specific departments to see if there were any scholarships I should be applying for there, or like if there was a way that I could get a private loan from the university. And then I also did kind of like a family loan, asked several people in my family to put together some money for me that I ended up paying back. And I worked part-time. So, and I had some savings. So all of that together is what was able to help me fund my master's program. And I kind of like talk about this funding. If you're applying to master programs, I would also recommend that you look into the different schools within a university. So outside of California, the higher chances that you have of getting funding is with maybe private universities that are Ivy League or very well known, because they have a lot of more money to give out than other, less well-known or less wealthy universities. And within those wealthy private universities, each school will have different funding. So maybe in Harvard, the Kennedy School of Government would have a lot more funding opportunities than the education school, because the people that graduate from those schools are the ones that give back. So you can imagine if you're, a government or a president of somewhere, you're gonna give back money to the Harvard graduates, the Kennedy School. But if you're a teacher, maybe you don't necessarily want to give money back to grad school. So something to keep in mind.
Definitely, Alma, thank you. So we're coming up on our about last 10 minutes. So any final questions, put them through that Q&A. Hopefully we'll get to all of them. So another one is, if this applies to you, are you afraid of losing a legal work permit through Daca? And what are your backup plans? That is something that scares me the most.
I was like, we all unmuted ourselves at the same time. That's definitely a conversation that I had with my primary faculty advisor before I even accepted my admissions to UC Davis. because I applied when Daca had originally been rescinded. And I told her, I was like, I don't know how long I have with my work permit, but I know that I want to go to graduate school. How can we make this work? And that was another reason why I chose to go to Davis, and it was because of my my advisor. She was like, we will do whatever it takes for you to finish your graduate degree with or without a work permit. So even though I am working right now and I do have my work permit, we still don't know what could happen, which is why I'm trying to finish my PhD in 4 years. I just began my third year today, so really it's about being strategic and how can I make myself competitive enough where once I get my PhD, I can actually be hired by a university and potentially sponsored by that university that actually hires me. So it's trying to have those difficult conversations. And it was definitely a very difficult and scary conversation that I had with my advisor. But I had a previous relationship with her. She was my professor as an undergrad, and I built a very trusting relationship with her. So I was not afraid to actually start that conversation with her. And even her just initiating and being willing to find different funding avenues for me if I do end up losing my work permit, really helped me in making that decision to actually stay in school. And then what are my my choices after I do graduate.
I was gonna say that, yeah, I do feel scared sometimes that we'll lose the work permit, but I think that is a bigger incentive to go get, or that was a bigger incentive to go get my graduate degree, because if for some reason, if I get deported or if the work permit expires and I choose to leave the country, I'm still gonna have the college degree and I'll still have the master's degree and all the knowledge that it came with. So wherever I am in the world, like it'll be acknowledged that I went to Harvard and that I got that master's. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me now that I'm in the workforce, I think it's scary. I mean, I am adjusting my status, but you know, nobody really knows how long that's going to take to actually get through. So like for me, I feel like I got to a point in my life where like I've done all the education I can. I'm trying to build a career and it's all might get cut short because DACA ends, right? I've told my manager and she understands and she's supportive, but like I think for me, I'm at a point where if it goes away, that's it. You know, I'm going to have to realistically find another way to work either outside the US or, you know, I really don't want to think about what would happen. But on the flip side, I think for you guys who are thinking about grad school, I feel like grad school is actually a safe place to be during this uncertainty, because I feel like universities are a bit more flexible in terms of coming up with new mechanisms, new frameworks for how to employ you without DACA, right? Yeah, maybe I'll go back to business school, who knows? But for now, I'm just like, if it's the end, it's the end for me. I'll figure something out, but it might not be in this country.
And it's, I feel like also, I like to mention that, like, if I look at the reason why my family moved to the US, it was really to achieve what we call like the American dream, right? Like maybe be in a safe place, be economically stable, et cetera, like have an education, learn English. And so I feel that getting that graduate degree allows me to fulfill that dream, whether I am here in the US or whether I have to migrate to a different country. So regardless of where I am, I still feel like I'll achieve those goals. And so it's not necessarily that I'm attached to this country, which I do love a lot. And like, I love California, but I don't want to connect my value to just being in the US. And if I can't stay here, then I'm not successful, or I won't be able to leave, or, not leave as in leave, but I won't be able to leave my life. I think even if I went to Europe or if I moved to Latin America, I feel like I'll be successful because of everything that I've gained here. But
that is so beautifully said, Alma, and everybody, thank you. So we are coming on the last few minutes here. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question through the Q&A, but one last thing from the panelists, can you just give us a few of your last parting words of wisdom, quick words of advice that you would give to everybody watching?
Build a network, reach out. I see some questions. Can we connect with you guys on LinkedIn? Please reach out. Feel free to email us or bug us. I got my job because I worked with someone in grad school that I only met my first 2 years there, and somebody I worked with is now my manager. So it's like the world is a very small place. So, connect with people, and don't be afraid to be shy. Like, just break that barrier and reach out.
Yeah, definitely. Apply to those programs. I know that being an undocumented student is scary, and there comes a lot of uncertainty, but as Angel and Alma had said before, being in school, I feel like, is the safest place that you can be with or without a work permit. Definitely, if you find a community that is willing to advocate and support you, where you can find allies that are willing to to fight for your rights and for you to stay in school. So just keep on the good fight, and if you ever have any questions, we're definitely willing to be a source of support for you all.
And I would say that, like, if you are thinking of grad school, start preparing, prepare well. If you apply, don't get in, apply again, find out why you didn't get in, and keep trying it. And then once you're there, remember that you deserve to be there and that's your place.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And please be sure to check out all of the links that were just dropped in the chat. I know Adriana and Angel, you shared some links earlier. So definitely be sure to check those out. And then we can have Han pull up that screen again, which has everybody's contact information on it. Perfect. So all of them, talking about networking, start now. All of them are sharing their LinkedIn's here, their emails. Like I said, if I didn't answer your question in the Q&A, shoot them an email, continue that conversation with them privately. They're all more than willing to help you out. And I think another big takeaway from all this is that you're not alone in this. You're not alone, and it is more than possible, as Alma, Adriana, and Angel have showed us tonight. So virtual round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all so much for your time and for your honesty in being here. We really appreciate it.